Hello on the Sidelines fans. I'm your host, as always, Cameron Capobianco, and joining me today, I'm so pleased and honored to have this man on. It is Marvin Okello from the Halifax Wanderers. Marvin, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Cameron. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
So before we get into where you are right now, currently with the Halifax Wanderers, why don't we just start off with what do you do right now with the team? Like, give us a little job description.
Yeah, so my job description has evolved a lot over the years, but I've landed on this year being the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Manager, and I'm also the Manager of Member Services for the club.
Right, okay, and let's get more into that a little bit later, but first, I want to ask you, I always ask my guests this, what made you fall in love with the game of soccer or football?
Well, I fell in love with the game of football, as how I grew up calling it, because I grew up in Kenya in East Africa, because it was my happy place. It was what got me not to think about all the things that were happening around me, and in Kenya, and in a country that was filled with all sorts of turmoil and other things. When I had the ball at my feet, none of it mattered. It was just me and the touches and the goals. And even though I wasn't even playing with like a nice Adidas or Nike ball, we were playing with balls that were made out of, plastic bags that were rolled into each other and tied with elastic. I was happiest when I had the ball at my feet.
And were there any players maybe growing up that you would say you grew up idolizing? And if so, who are those players?
Oh, 100%. My friends call me Marvinho because one of my favorite players as a kid growing up was Ronaldinho. Henry and Ronaldinho were the two players who really made me fall in love with the game and made me want to be a creative player. So like my Instagram handle says, Marvinho 9, 10, 11. I can play any of those three positions because of those two guys, Ronaldinho and Henry. Were just amazing to watch. I'm a huge Arsenal fan first and Barcelona second, and those guys are the epitome of those two clubs. So those would be the two guys.
And you mentioned too your two favorite teams right there, Arsenal and Barcelona. I guess you were a big fan of that invincible year back in I believe 2004 it was, with Thierry Henry and that Arsenal squad from that Premier League. Amazing run.
It really was, and that year is what really solidified kind of my love for those clubs. Arsenal, especially going invincibles. I liked them before that, but to me, it kind of just solidified that they were one of the best teams in the world and that everyone should love them. And I guess everyone got to see what Arsene Wenger was capable of, because I moved to Canada the same year that Arsene Wenger took over Arsenal, and I have my birthday is like a few days difference from Mesut Ozil. So there's a lot of synergies with me and Arsenal.
That's awesome to hear. But my next question for you is, when you used to play soccer, when you went to a transition, as a player to a coach at the Bedford Titans Soccer Club, did you find any maybe challenges on that move about going from a player to a coaching role on the sidelines?
Definitely. And I actually talk about it in depth in one of my episodes on Together for Change podcast that I run for the Wanderers with Mallory McDonald, where one of the first teams I coached was actually a girls team. And it was tough for me going from a player who, when you're playing, you just focus on what you're doing, being on the right place on the field, contributing, covering, on offense, defense, and now having to be a coach and having to see where everybody on the field is doing it any individual time, and how one person being, out of position affects the next person, and having to see things at a high level, but then also dealing with the non-sporting issues of things. So like, coaching girls, you have, girls talking about, periods and things that just aren't in relation to the game, that really threw me off. And I wasn't as mature as I probably needed to be at that time to coach girls. So I actually ended up stepping down and recommending they hire a female for that team, because from me as like an 18-year-old at the time, it was a tough job. And I mean, I learned through the experience, and it's got me to the position where I am now as the diversity manager, but it definitely was a tough experience. My first time transitioning from playing to coaching.
And so with the game evolving throughout these many years that the game of soccer, football has been around, do any of the kids nowadays try and, as people like to say, school you in new moves and that come out with the game?
Oh, of course, of course. That's one of the beauties of football is that it's always evolving and changing. And I have nephews and nieces who play soccer, so they're always trying to one up me, and I try to be in touch with the kids who are in university and whatnot right now, because I still play in the men's league here with the local team Suburban. So I see those university and high school kids who are trying to do the latest tricks that Neymar and whatever are doing. And I try to keep up with them because I enjoy those dangles and those tricks and flicks. So I can still do a lot of them. And if my friends send me the videos, I'll usually spend a couple hours in the field trying to learn them, so I'm not out of touch.
And why don't we now get into how you got to where you are today at Halifax Wanderers FC for the diversity, equity, and inclusion manager? Why don't you start us off with how did you get the job, first of all, not the job of diversity, equity, and inclusion manager, but how did you just get the job in general working with the Halifax Wanderers?
So I've been involved in the soccer community since we moved here when I was 11 years old from Fredericton to Nova Scotia. And so I played for Scotia was the team initially, which evolved to what's now Suburban. I played on the provincial team under 14, 15, 16. I played Canada Games. I was coached by Steve Hart for a number of sessions during our Canada Games team, who is now the Wanderers head coach. After that, I played in the men's league, Dartmouth United, with a coworker named Jamie McGuinness, who was initially our VP of marketing and sales. And he actually brought me on as a brand ambassador initially, knowing that I'm good with kids and just with the soccer community. So I was invited to be a brand ambassador for our launch in 2018 at the Convention Center in Halifax. And then after that, got involved in some ticket sales on just a contract basis, just kind of converting people from those $50 deposits into season tickets. And I put up some solid numbers with my sales, and I was offered a full-time position as a ticket sales manager in 2019. And then that involved into where I am now.
And I can talk right there for 1 second. I just want to try and figure this out. With working for Halifax Wanderers, you mentioned that you were, like you said, as a coach, and currently where you are, you like working with kids and that stuff. Was there anything that you guys specifically did, and maybe with like pro clubs doing it, like maybe events and stuff for kids to like enjoy and get to know maybe the Wanderers and that stuff?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a rover tournament every summer. COVID, unfortunately, didn't allow us to have it the last 2 summers, 2020, 2021. Then in 2019, we had the rover 4v4 tournament, which allows our players to act as refs and coaches, and also kind of just involved with the players who were in the tournament, which are all ages and all skill levels. So that is something that we as a club value, in both not just the staff getting to meet the kids in the community, but also our players getting to understand that there is an opportunity to continue being involved in the game once their career ends by transitioning into coaches and getting on that side of the sport. And
Marvin, I know it's kind of fast, but this is my last question for you. I always ask my guests this, always at the end of every interview. What are some pieces of advice you can give to young kids who maybe want to follow in your footsteps? Because not a lot of kids want to play soccer, but they still want to get involved in a way with a club like Halifax or York or Pacific. Like, I'm just naming off CPL teams, or even Toronto FC. So what are some pieces of advice maybe you could give to younger kids, maybe younger adults who are looking to get into this workplace and work for maybe a CPL team?
Well, there's many avenues for being involved in sports teams. This week we actually just hired somebody on our retail side. We have people we've hired on sponsorships. We have co-op students who we have every year. It really comes down to work ethic, and that's something that we value in anybody that is involved with us, from a volunteer level, from a working level. It's just work ethic. Work ethic will get you very far in life if you show that you're a hard worker, you're a dedicated worker, and you're an inclusive worker in terms of you're collaborating with your coworkers, male, female, all ages, and you're willing to work with them with their different skill levels for technology, whatever it may be, because the younger generation is obviously really good with technology and some of the older generation isn't. So if you can be one of those people who shows people in the office how to bridge that gap of knowledge of technology and just understanding and patience. That is really how you get a job with any organization, be it CPL, MLS, sports world or not, is work ethic. And that's something that has gotten me far, got me in the foot of the door with the Wanderers, but it's gotten me moving up because of my work ethic. So that'll take you far, work ethic.
Absolutely. Well, Marvin, I know it was short, but I want to say I did enjoy this interview, and thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed talking with you on this episode of On the Sidelines, and hopefully we can have you on again in the future.
Definitely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the podcast, talking about soccer and getting people to be more aware of the opportunities. And thanks for having me, and hopefully again soon.
Guys, Marvin Okello of the Halifax Wanderers. I'm Cameron Capobianco, and we'll catch you in the next episode.